Tonight's story takes us to the quiet southern English coastal town of Westcliff-on-Sea. It begins innocently enough with a man standing by the seashore. He's planned to spend the day with a group of friends on a fishing trip. A trip that will get him out of the house and into the fresh air.
Okay, that's it. You're too late.
I'll have you! Don't worry, I'll have you! Kill you!
No, I know what I did was wrong, but I want to make a go of it again.
We've talked about it a lot. We've both done some silly things, but we still want to be together.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. It's refreshing to see a couple prepared to try. So many people just give up these days.
34-year-old Michael Barber had heard the rumours about his wife, but up until that morning he'd refused to believe them. To make matters worse, the other man had been his best friend, Simon Harris. But since that dreadful day, things had started to look up. His wife had been making an extra special effort. She'd even been the one to suggest talking to their GP about their problems. But his change in fortune didn't last long.
What's the matter, mate? What's the matter with you, mate?
I feel terrible.
You just concentrate on getting well. Don't worry about me and the kids.
I wonder if I can have a quiet word with Mr. Barber.
Yeah, sure.
We're not absolutely sure what's wrong. The symptoms are very worrying. His kidneys seem to be failing and there's some bleeding to his lungs. And of course you've seen his throat is ulcerated. I think he's suffering from something called good pastures syndrome.
What's that?
It's very rare and no one knows how it's caused, but it would produce symptoms like these.
What's going to happen to him?
People can recover from this, but I'm afraid there have been cases where it's proved to be fatal. The internal organs just stop working. Now, we're doing the very best we can, but I'm afraid all we can really do is hope.
but Michael Barber never did recover. On June the 27th, 1981, he died. A post-mortem examination gave the cause of death as renal failure and pneumonia.
He suffered so much. I can't get it out of my head. Sight of him lying there in so much pain.
He had been married for 11 years. Over the next 6 months, Susan Barber got on with her life, and the death of her husband was quietly forgotten by those around her. Then, one winter's morning, a letter arrived on the desk of John Clark, a detective chief inspector with Essex Police.
Michael Barber died last summer. I had a look back and it wasn't reported to us at the time. The consultant who treated him has just sent a letter to say there was some mix-up over the cause of death.
What do you want me to do, sir?
I know we're busy, Graham, but I want you to go and see this consultant, see if there's anything in it, and sort it one way or the other.
The consultant, a Dr. Andrew Rees, was based at Hammersmith Hospital in West London. Michael Barber was transferred from Southend General Hospital to Hammersmith for specialist treatment in their intensive therapy unit.
Well, to go right back to the beginning of the story, well, Michael Barber was a patient under my care in the renal unit at this hospital. When he came here, he'd been diagnosed as suffering from either Legionnaire's disease or Goodpasture's syndrome, but as I said in my letter, one of the doctors on my team thought it might be something else. He believed that the symptoms pointed to Mr. Barber having been poisoned with paraquat weedkiller.
So why wasn't this mentioned on the death certificate?
Yes, well, this is where I find myself at a slight disadvantage. I asked at the time for samples of Mr. Barber's blood to be sent to the National Poisons Reference Centre for analysis. And I was given to understand that the results came back as having been negative for paraquat.
What made you change your mind?
Well, Mr. Barber's case was so unusual that it was re-examined in preparation for a medical conference, and the same conclusion was reached, that his symptoms were of paraquat poisoning and not Legionnaire's disease or Goodpasture's. Furthermore, when we checked through his case notes, we could find no trace of his samples having been sent off. And when we checked with the reference centre, they confirmed that they hadn't received them.
So you sent some new samples off for analysis?
That's right. And they tested positive.
It can mean one of three things: suicide, an accident, or murder. There was no suicide note, so that probably narrows it down to 2. But first of all, we still have to establish that it was paraquat that killed him.
Yeah, well, the test came back positive.
Well, that's what the hospital is saying. They've already admitted to making one mix-up. We wouldn't be able to rely on their evidence in court. If we're going to take this any further, we're going to have to do it the hard way. We're going to have to get our own samples and have our own tests done on them.
He's been dead 6 months. Did Mr. Barber have any visitors?
Oh, just his wife, really.
Susan Barber?
I think it was Susan, yes. And a couple of times, a young man came with her. He used to sit outside when she went in. Don't remember his name. I think it was her brother or something.
What did he look like?
Well, he was a young fella, fair-haired. That's all I remember of him.
Do you remember if Mr. Barber said anything before he died?
Mr. Barber was too ill to actually speak. But when we were trying to find out what was wrong with him, we asked him a question. We knew he wouldn't be able to talk, so we asked him to give us a signal. We asked him to nod if the answer was yes, and to shake his head if the answer was no. We asked him if there's any chance he could have swallowed some weed killer by mistake. Quite soon after that, he lost consciousness, and he never regained it.
Well, I go. Well, it don't look like it was an accident, so that narrows it down to 1.
What about the body? Did you find out where he was buried?
He was cremated.
The mystery of Michael Barber's sudden death was deepening, and Clark decided the time had come to open out the investigation. But Susan Barber was not to be bothered. Clark didn't want to risk upsetting the newly widowed young mother with his inquiries. The team discovered from the electoral register that she still lived with her 3 children in the house in Westcliff-on-Sea that she had shared with her husband.
No, thanks.
It was awful. We felt so sorry for Susan and the children.
Were the Barbers a happy couple?
Well, there was some talk about Susan before her husband died.
What kind of talk?
About what she used to get up to.
With other fellas?
Yes, all right. Well, anyway, I don't want to talk about any other times, but there was one time that I saw it with my own eyes. A couple of weeks before he died, Mr. Barber came home and called her with a bloke. There was a terrible row. We could hear them shouting. And he chased this bloke right out on the street.
We saw his bare arse and everything running up the road.
Do you know who this man was?
Well, I'd seen him a couple of times before. Quite a young bloke he was. He had a sort of baby face. Fair-haired.
The need to find a fresh sample from Michael Barber that Clark's team could test themselves for paraquat was one of paramount importance. The hospital had been asked to make a search, but it was now almost a year since Michael Barber had first been admitted.
You okay in these sorts of places? I'll be back in a moment. This is the one. Do you have a strong stomach?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I think this is what you've been looking for. Those are Michael Barber's internal organs.
You sure?
Absolutely. The label.
But what are they doing in here?
They were removed during the post-mortem examination. Then a decision was taken to preserve them for research purposes. You're lucky. It's been so long now, I'd almost forgotten about them.
He was poisoned. The organs in that bucket showed he'd been given large doses of paraquat.
Well, what we've done is to convince ourselves that we'd have one hell of a job trying to prove this in a court. That bucket was standing there for months. Anyone could have had access to it. The hospital's already had one mix-up. Who's to say they haven't had another? They could have been anyone's organs inside that bucket. That's what a good defence barrister would say. What we need is a sample we can trace right back to when it was taken, so there can be no argument that it comes from Michael Barber. In the meantime, we need to start thinking about this like a proper murder inquiry. Go right back to the beginning. Who had a motive? Who would have wanted him dead?
I'd heard the rumours. I've never seen Mrs. Barber with another man. I remember thinking at the time that there was something strange about the way Mr. Barber died.
Why?
Well, he was always such a fit man. I don't ever remember him having a day off work.
Were there ever any problems at the house?
Not that I was aware of. Less. Well, the police came round a couple of times.
What for?
I don't know. But I remember they came round the night Michael Barber was cremated.
Now they had to trace the baby-faced man who'd been chased naked into the street by Michael Barber and who'd gone with Susan to the hospital. They found that Michael was a member of a local darts team, but all they knew about the baby-faced man was that he was a friend of Michael's and he had fair hair.
Get in there!
Yeah, come on, get that down your neck. Sorry.
They decided to go for a discreet chat with another member of the darts team.
The fair-haired bloke was Simon Harris, big mates with Michael Barber. All three of us used to play darts together.
Did you ever see him with Susan Barber?
Everyone knew about it, except Michael. Simon used to go round there to see her while Michael was at work. Well, eventually he caught him at it. Well, he blamed Simon, but she controlled that boy. I don't think he's ever met anyone quite like Susan before, if you know what I mean. Now, Simon would do whatever she wanted.
What was the patient number?
21460D.
You're in luck. It's some serum from a blood sample taken just before he died.
It was the stroke of luck Clark had been looking for. The new sample also tested positive for paraquat. But unlike the internal organs in the mortuary, everyone who had come into contact with the serum sample, including the person who took it, could be traced. Clark could prove there had been no mix-up.
No, I'm still going to be here for a while. Yeah, you can come up now.
But the investigation was in danger of foundering on a new problem. One riddle had been solved. It had been established that Michael Barber was poisoned with gramoxone, an industrial version of paraquat not sold in the shops. Then a friend remembered Mr. Barber used to be a landscape gardener. A job in the gardening trade gave Clark the link he'd been looking for between Michael Barber and gramoxone. He must have kept some for his personal use. Whoever killed him must have known what was in his shed. But here was the problem. When the team checked with ICI, they were told that as a safeguard, special ingredients were put in gramoxone to make someone vomit as soon as it entered their stomach. Why hadn't that happened to Michael Barber?
What have you got?
Well, I finally traced the reports on the police call out to the Barber's house.
What was that?
Do you remember one of the neighbours saying that the police were at Susan Barber's house the night of the funeral?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the reports say that they were called to a party, but the occupants were getting a bit out of hand.
A party on the night of the funeral?
Hardly the grieving widow, was she?
Have we heard back from the gardening place Michael Barber worked at?
Hockley Landscapes. They said he was a good worker, knew his stuff, knew all about handling paraquat. As far as they can remember, and it was a few years ago, apparently he was fanatical about wearing gloves when he used it.
A few years. How long ago did he work there?
Early 70s, I think. Why?
1971. That was the date Clark was looking for. It had been 10 years since Michael Barber had left the landscape gardening company. The gap in time chimed in with something Clark had read about gramoxone weedkiller. He wondered.
It's very unlikely that you could take gramoxone now without knowing it, even if it was mixed with something else. The smell is so strong. And it contains a emetic. It can make you vomit. You see, we decided to add some ingredients to the formulation to stop accidents.
When you say add some ingredients, do you mean the formulation has changed?
That is correct.
I want to be quite clear about this. Would it have been possible at one time to take gramoxone without knowing it and not be sick?
Yes, that was why we decided to change the formulation. There used to be a lot more suicides, even some murders.
Do you know when it was changed?
Yes, I do. The new formulation, Gramoxone, was introduced in 1978.
And it definitely wasn't available before then?
No, not before 78.
Clark decided the time had come to make his move. He had the means, poisoning by gramoxone. He had the motive. Michael Barber was standing in the way of an illicit love affair between his wife and Simon Harris. Witnesses had been asked to keep quiet about the investigation, but it was only a matter of time before Susan Barber or Harris would get wind of it. Then Clark would lose the element of surprise. He moved in to arrest Susan Barber himself. Simultaneously, another team moved in to arrest Simon Harris.
Oh, you're giving me a heart failure. Well, it was Sue. She's the one that gave him the stuff. You got the wrong one, honestly. It's not me.
The idea was to surprise both of them before they had the chance to concoct an alibi.
Is Susan Barber inside?
She's upstairs in bed.
Go upstairs, tell her to put some clothes on and bring her down.
What's going on?
Susan Barber, I'm arresting you for the murder of your husband, Michael Barber.
Murder? Me?
You don't have to say anything.
Clark's tactic worked. Harris was so shocked by his sudden arrest that he quickly admitted knowing Michael Barber had been poisoned, but he said he had not administered any himself.
We know that you were having an affair with Simon Harris. We know that your husband came home and caught you. You have murdered your husband. What I want to know is why.
I didn't mean to. I only gave him a little bit. I didn't know he was going to die. I didn't want him to die.
What did you give him?
Some stuff. Some brown stuff. Kept it in the shed. Poured it into the cab. Then I poured it into the gravy. Mixed it in. Made you some gravy, love.
Give it. Stop it.
He was the only one who liked gravy. The kids wouldn't touch it. He loved his gravy, though.
The jury refused to accept Susan Barber's claim that she had only wanted her husband to suffer, as she said he had made her suffer after he found her in bed with her lover. At the Chelmsford Crown Court on November the 1st, 1982, she was found guilty of murder and conspiracy to murder, and sentenced to life imprisonment. The man we called Simon Harris was found guilty of conspiracy to murder and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. In passing sentence on Susan Barber, Mr. Justice Wolfe said, "I cannot think of a more evil way of disposing of a human being." At this, Barber showed the first signs of emotion. As she was led down to the cell, she started crying. But as Detective Chief Inspector Clark said afterwards, what we can't be certain of is why she was crying. Good evening.